She wasn't the kind of woman men in his world noticed. Not because she was invisible, though she'd spent years perfecting the art of it, but because the men in Donatello Reeves' orbit had a very specific idea of what a woman worth noticing looked like. Tall, sharp-jawed, the kind of thin that photographed well at charity galas, the kind of beautiful that felt like a status symbol rather than a person. Rosie Callum was none of those things. She was 29 years old, soft in the way that real women are soft. Full hips, rounded shoulders, a face that dimpled when she smiled, which she didn't do often at work, not because she wasn't happy, but because she had learned early on that women who looked like her were taken more seriously when they kept their expressions neutral, when they spoke only when necessary, when they made themselves easy to overlook. She had been the head bookkeeper for the Reeve organization for 3 years. 3 years of 14-hour days, of spreadsheets that documented things the IRS would never be allowed to see, of quietly correcting errors that would have cost the organization hundreds of thousands of dollars. 3 years of knowing exactly where every dollar went, into which shell company, through which offshore account, under which perfectly legal-looking umbrella, and never once breathing a word of it to anyone. She was, by any objective measure, indispensable. Donatello Reeve had never once looked at her like she was. He was not a man who explained himself. At 42, Donatello had built an empire on 3 things: silence, patience, and the willingness to do what other men flinched from. He controlled the Eastern Seaboard's most sophisticated financial laundering network, owned 11 legitimate businesses, and had never, not once in 20 years, been successfully charged with anything more serious than a parking violation. He was also, by most accounts, terrifying, not in the way that cheap criminals were terrifying, with their shouting and their threats. Donatello was terrifying the way a very calm, very still ocean is terrifying, because you couldn't see the bottom and you had no idea what was moving beneath the surface. His office on the 43rd floor of the Reeve Capitol building overlooked downtown Providence. And he sat at his desk on a Tuesday morning, reviewing the quarterly accounts Rosie had delivered to him at 7 a.m. sharp, left in the leather folder on the corner of his desk, the way she always did, the way he had never thought to question, because the numbers were always immaculate, and the coffee she left beside the folder was always exactly the right temperature, and some men take for granted the things that keep their world running. He turned a page, stopped, a line item flagged in yellow, a note in her careful, small handwriting in the margin. This transfer was split across 4 accounts to avoid threshold reporting. Combined, it reads, clean. Separated, it will look intentional to a forensic auditor. Recommend consolidating under Meridian Holdings before end of quarter. RC. He read it twice. Then he sat back in his chair, and for the first time in a long time, felt something that might have been surprise. He pressed the intercom. Send Callum in. His assistant, a lean, nervous man named Fletcher, appeared at the door instead. Mrs. Callum isn't in the building, sir. She left at 6:30. She mentioned she had a personal appointment this evening. Donatello looked at his watch. It was 7:40 in the evening. He had not noticed the hours pass. Fine, he said. He went back to the note in the margin. Recommend consolidating. She had written it the way someone writes a grocery list. Matter of fact, unpanicked, as though she had looked at a problem that would have sent 2 of his previous accountants into sweating, stammering fits and simply solved it. In the margin, with a yellow highlighter. He didn't know why that bothered him. He didn't know why he was still thinking about it when he left the building an hour later, or why he mentioned it to no one. He found out about the dinner by accident. His driver, a quiet man named Soren, took a different route back from a meeting in the jewelry district on Thursday night, a water main break on Benefit Street, a detour through the restaurant corridor on Wickenden, and there, through the rain-streaked window of the car, was a warm-lit tableau framed in the glass front of Aurelio's. Aurelio's was the kind of restaurant that didn't advertise, the kind that didn't need to. A reservation required knowing the right person, and the right person required knowing that the restaurant existed, and the dining room inside was lit with candles that cost more per hour than most people made in a day. Donatello would not have looked twice, except that he recognized her. She was seated at a table near the window, and she was laughing. He had never seen her laugh. Not like that, head tipped back slightly. One hand pressed to her mouth like she was trying to contain it. Her whole body softened with genuine amusement. She was wearing something dark red off the shoulder, and her hair was down, and she looked. Soren was still driving. "Stop the car," Donatello said. Soren stopped the car. She was laughing at something the man across from her had said. The man was around her age, clean-cut, jacket without a tie, the comfortable, easy confidence of someone who had never had to be afraid of anyone. He leaned forward when he spoke to her. He looked at her like he was paying attention. Donatello stared through the window of the car for 4 seconds, which was 4 seconds longer than he had ever stared at anything that wasn't a business problem. "Who made a reservation at Aurelio's under her name?" he said. It wasn't really a question. Soren, who had worked for Donatello long enough to know better, said nothing. "Get me Vito." He did not go inside. That was the decision he made, sitting in the car in the rain, watching Rosie Callum smile at a man who looked at her like she was interesting. He made the decision deliberately. He was not a man who acted on impulse, who let something as stupid as an unexpected feeling move him before he'd had time to think it through. He called Vito, who handled background checks, and gave him a name. The name came back in 11 minutes. Arthur Finch, 32, civil engineer. No record, no affiliations. Coached Little League on Saturdays, owned a rescue greyhound named Biscuit, had been on 3 previous dates with Rosie Callum, according to his phone's shared calendar, which Vito had accessed in the way that Vito accessed things. 3 previous dates. Donatello sat with that information for a long moment. 3 dates. He didn't know what to do with the feeling that moved through him when he read that number, and because he was not a man accustomed to not knowing what to do with things, the feeling made him irritable in a way that was disproportionate to any rational explanation. His phone buzzed. "Fletcher, sir, the Calloway situation needs a decision tonight." He answered it. He handled the Calloway situation. He told Soren to drive. He did not look back at the restaurant window. He looked back at the restaurant window. Rosie had her chin resting in her palm, and she was listening to Arthur Finch with the focused, quiet attention that she usually reserved for balance sheets. And something about that, the idea that she looked at this man, the way she looked at things she found genuinely worth understanding, sat in Donatello's chest like a stone that hadn't been there before. "Drive," he said. He was in a worse mood the next day than anyone in his organization could account for. Fletcher brought the wrong coffee and received a look so flat and cold that he went back to the kitchen and made a second cup without being asked. The Meridian Holdings meeting ran 20 minutes long because 2 of his lieutenants kept interrupting each other, which he normally tolerated, and which today he shut down with a single sentence that left the room very quiet. A man named Prescott, who handled Northern Rhode Island, made a joke during lunch that landed poorly and spent the rest of the afternoon wondering if he still had a job. Rosie arrived at her usual time, 9 sharp, and set a new folder on his desk without knocking. She never knocked, because she knew he was always already there, and he looked up from his phone when she walked in, which he did not usually do. She was wearing her usual work clothes. Dark slacks, a soft cream blouse that she'd tucked in with the careful deliberateness of someone who had made peace with her body in ways she wasn't broadcasting. Her reading glasses were pushed up on top of her head. She looked, as she always looked, like someone who was here to work and expected nothing more. "The Whitmore account needs your signature on the third-party declaration," she said. There's a 36-hour window before it flags. Sit down, he said. She blinked. In 3 years, he had never asked her to sit down. The chair on the other side of his desk was for attorneys and the occasionally unfortunate business associate. Rosie stood. I'm fine standing, she said. Rosie. Her name in his mouth, without the professional buffer of Miss Callum, seemed to surprise her. She sat. He looked at her for a moment, actually looked at her, the way he had apparently been failing to do for 3 years, and said, "The Meridian note, in the quarterly report." She straightened slightly. On guard. Was there an issue with my recommendation? No. It was correct. Okay. She waited. Why didn't you bring it to me directly? I didn't think you wanted to be interrupted for something that wasn't time-sensitive. It would have cost us $400,000 in exposure. I know. That's why I flagged it. In the margin, yes. He leaned back. You've been doing this for 3 years, finding things, fixing them quietly, leaving notes. That's my job. No, he said. Your job is the books. What you've been doing is something else. She held very still. He had learned in the past 24 hours, not that he had been paying particular attention, that Rosie Callum went still when she wasn't sure if she was being reprimanded or complimented, and she was trying to determine which it was before she committed to a response. It was a careful habit. Smart. I appreciate the work, he said. I should have said so before now. The stillness broke. She blinked once, quickly, and looked down at the folder in her lap, and the small, controlled way she absorbed the compliment, like she hadn't expected it, like she was making sure it was real before she let it land, did something uncomfortable to the stone in his chest. Thank you, she said quietly. Go do the Whitmore signature. She went. He started noticing things after that, which was either a sign of self-awareness or a problem, depending on how he looked at it. He noticed that she took her lunch at her desk 4 days out of 5, eating something she'd brought from home and reading things that had nothing to do with work. He'd seen the corner of a novel, once, sticking out from under a stack of invoices. He noticed that she always knew when the coffee in the break room was fresh. Because she could apparently hear the specific gurgle of the machine from 2 rooms away, he noticed that she was funny, in the dry, deadpan way of someone who was always watching, who found the gap between how things were and how people pretended they were to be a constant, quiet source of amusement. He'd heard her, through the open door of the copy room, say something to Fletcher that had made Fletcher laugh so hard he'd knocked over a stapler. He noticed that she had not mentioned the dinner. This was not surprising. She didn't share personal information at work. She was professional in the way that people are professional when they have decided that the workplace is not the place where they exist as a full person. He understood this. He operated the same way. He told himself this was why he kept thinking about Arthur Finch. It was not because of Arthur Finch. The Thursday following, Donatello had a meeting at the Marquee Club, the legitimate face of 3 separate income streams, a venue that hosted private events and served extremely good food and employed exactly the kind of staff you didn't ask too many questions about. He arrived at 9, which was later than he'd intended, because the Providence Bridge situation had added 20 minutes to the drive. He handed his coat to the front staff, nodded to the floor manager, and walked through the main dining room toward the private hall in the back. He stopped. There was a table near the far window. Rosie was there. She was there and she was different. Not the cream blouse, not the dark slacks. She was wearing something the color of deep plum, a wrap dress that moved when she walked, and she was walking toward the table because she'd just come back from somewhere, the restroom maybe, or the bar. And she moved through the room with an ease he hadn't seen in her before, not the careful, contained movement of someone trying to take up the right amount of space. She walked like she knew she was allowed to be there. Arthur Finch stood when she approached the table. He stood up, pulled her chair out. Donatello had not moved from the entrance of the dining room. The floor manager appeared at his elbow. "Sir, your party is in a moment." He watched Rosie laugh at something again. He watched Arthur Finch look at her like he could do it all night and not get tired of it. He watched her pick up her glass and hold it the way she held her coffee mug at her desk, both hands wrapped around it, comfortable and unself-conscious, and something in him that had been very carefully quiet for the past 10 days came up hard against the inside of his chest like a fist. He walked across the dining room. Rosie saw him when he was 6 steps away, and the ease in her face shifted, not to fear exactly, but to the careful professional neutrality she wore at the office, like putting on a mask she hadn't expected to need tonight. "Mr. Reeve," she said. "Rosie." He glanced at Arthur Finch. Arthur Finch looked back at him with the pleasant, slightly uncertain expression of a man who doesn't know if he should stand up or stay seated. "I didn't know you frequented the marquee." "I didn't know you owned it," she said evenly. "There are a number of things I own that don't come up in the quarterly reports." A pause. Arthur Finch looked between them. "This is Arthur," Rosie said. "Arthur, this is my employer, Mr. Reeve Donatello," he said, and extended his hand. Arthur shook it. He had a firm handshake. Donatello noted this with the dispassionate precision of a man cataloguing a threat he didn't fully understand yet. "Will you join us?" Arthur asked, because Arthur Finch was apparently the kind of man who extended the generous, easy invitation of someone who had no reason to feel threatened, which made Donatello dislike him with an efficiency he hadn't expected. "I have a meeting," Donatello said. "Of course," Rosie said. Smooth, professional. "Enjoy your evening, Mr. Reeve." It was a dismissal. She dismissed him, calmly, quietly, with the exact tone she used when she had finished presenting something, and there was nothing left to discuss. He walked to his meeting. He did not enjoy it. He lasted 40 minutes. The meeting was with 2 men from Baltimore who wanted to move product through the Reeve distribution channels and were offering a number that was either very good or a trap. And he could not make himself care about either possibility, which was so far outside his normal that one of the Baltimore men asked if he was feeling all right. "Fine," Donatello said. "You seem fine," he said again, and the Baltimore man stopped talking. He left the private hall and went back through the main dining room, which was what he told himself he was not doing as he did it. The table near the far window was empty. He stood there for a moment, looking at the 2 glasses, one with a faint lipstick mark on the rim, and felt something that was not quite anger and not quite loss, but occupied the same uncomfortable neighborhood as both. He went back to his car. "Home?" Soren asked. "No," he thought. "The office." He went to his desk. He pulled out the quarterly report. He turned to the page with her note in the margin. Recommend consolidating under Meridian Holdings before end of quarter. RC. And he read it again, for no reason that he could explain to anyone, and sat in his 43rd floor office at 11 o'clock on a Thursday night, and finally admitted to himself that he had a problem. She was at her desk at 9 the next morning. He walked past her office, stopped, walked back. She looked up. The professional mask, the one she'd put on last night, was already in place. She was very good at it. He had not used to notice. "The Whitmore Declaration went through," she said. "Clean, I know." He stayed in the doorway. "I owe you an apology." She blinked. "For what? For last night?" I interrupted. "Your dinner." "You said hello to your employee at your own restaurant," she said. "There's nothing to apologize for, Rosie." The way she went still again. The way his use of her name alone, without any professional scaffolding around it, seemed to catch her somewhere she wasn't defended. "I wasn't being professional," he said. "I was being something else. I think you know that." She looked at him for a long moment. He was very conscious, suddenly, of the fact that she was the kind of person who noticed things. Always had been. He simply hadn't been paying attention, and that she had probably noticed more than she'd let on, for longer than he'd realized. "Arthur is a good person," she said carefully. "I know. He's uncomplicated. I know that too. Those aren't small things. He stepped into the office. Not far, just far enough to close the distance between the doorway and the chair in front of her desk, the one for attorneys and unfortunate business associates, which he turned around and sat in backwards, arms resting on the top of the backrest. An informal posture. One he never used. No, he said, they're not. She looked at the chair, at him in it. Something in her expression shifted slightly, the mask not dropping exactly, but the edges going soft. What do you want, Mr. Reeve? Donatello. That doesn't answer the question. He looked at her, really looked at her, the way he should have been doing for 3 years, the way he'd been doing in his head for the past 2 weeks without quite admitting it. The dimple line at the corner of her mouth, the reading glasses on top of her head, the careful, intelligent eyes of a woman who had been underestimated so often that she'd started to use it as camouflage. I want to take you to dinner, he said. The silence that followed was very specific, not shocked exactly, more like the silence of someone who had prepared multiple responses for multiple possible conversations and had not prepared for this one. You saw me at dinner twice in 2 weeks, she said finally. I know, and you interrupted one of them. Yes, and now you want to take me to dinner. Yes, she looked down at her desk. One finger traced the edge of the folder in front of her, a small, unconscious movement the kind people make when they're thinking. I'm not the kind of woman, she started. Rosie, he said her name quietly, and she stopped. I know what you're about to say. I need you to not say it. She looked up. You've been telling yourself a story, he said, about what kind of woman gets invited, what kind of woman gets seen. I've been telling myself a different, equally stupid version of the same story, which is that I don't have time for things that aren't the organization, and that anything outside the organization is a liability. He paused. I was wrong about that, on both counts. She was very still. I've been watching you fix problems I didn't know existed in margins for 3 years, he said. I've been looking at numbers you improved and accounts you saved without once asking why they were better than they should have been. That is, a failure of attention, on my part. Her throat moved, the smallest swallow. I'm paying attention now, he said. She sat with that for a moment. He let her. The thing about complicated men, she said finally, is that they usually come with complicated problems. Yes, and uncomplicated problems have solutions. Complicated ones mostly just have more problems. Also true, so why would I choose that? He looked at her steadily. Because uncomplicated is comfortable, and you have never, in 3 years, chosen the comfortable answer when a correct one was available. The corner of her mouth moved, just slightly, the ghost of the dimple. That's an extremely manipulative thing to say, she said. I know. I'm an extremely manipulative person. She laughed. Short, surprised. The same laugh he'd seen through the restaurant window, the one that happened before she could contain it. And he felt something in his chest that was not the stone from before, but something different. Something that had more give to it, more warmth. Something that had apparently been waiting around patiently while he was busy being oblivious. One dinner, she said. Yes. Not one of yours. Somewhere I pick. He nodded. And you don't run a background check on anyone who sits near us. He was quiet for a moment. Define near, Donatello. Fine. She picked up her pen. Back to work. Or at least, performing back to work because her mouth still had the faint curve of the laugh in it. The Hargrove account needs to be restructured before the 15th. I'll have a proposal on your desk by Wednesday, he stood. Put the chair back. Wednesday, she confirmed without looking up. He walked to the door. Donatello. He stopped. She was looking at her folder, not at him, but the curve was still there. I noticed you looking, by the way. At the restaurant, the first time. A pause. I thought you were checking to make sure I wasn't somewhere I shouldn't be. He said nothing for a moment. Then, I wasn't. She nodded once. Like she'd known. Like she'd been waiting for him to catch up. He left her office and went back to his desk, and sat down and looked at the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and felt, for the first time in a long time, like he had been the one found out. Dinner was at a Portuguese place in the Fox Point neighborhood, 40 seats, no reservations, a chalkboard menu that changed daily. She had picked it because she knew the chef, a woman named Bettina who had been her downstairs neighbor before Rosie moved uptown, who came out of the kitchen to hug Rosie and look very pointedly at Donatello. "He's enormous," Bettina said to Rosie, as though he wasn't standing there. "He is," Rosie agreed. "Is he good?" "Undecided," Rosie said. Bettina looked at Donatello. "You break her heart, I put you in the stew." "Noted," he said. Bettina went back to the kitchen, apparently satisfied. They sat at a corner table, and Donatello looked at the chalkboard menu, and Rosie watched him look at it. "You've never been somewhere like this," she said. "Not a question. I own 4 restaurants. You own 4 restaurants that cost $200 a plate. This is different." "How?" She looked around the room. 40 seats, all full, warm with the noise of actual conversation. No one performing anything for anyone else. "This is somewhere you go because you like it, not because you want to be seen." He looked at her. "You don't want to be seen. I used to not want to. I'm reconsidering." The food came. They ate. He asked her, carefully and genuinely, how she had ended up in forensic accounting, and she told him about her aunt's embezzlement case, which she had been 17 when it happened, which she had watched destroy her aunt's business from the outside, and had decided, with the clear-eyed ferocity of a very young person who has just learned something permanent about the world, that she was going to understand money so thoroughly that it could never blindside her. He listened the way she listened at her desk. With his whole attention turned toward her, she asked him nothing about the organization. He was prepared for her to, and she didn't, and when he noticed she wasn't going to, he understood that she already knew everything she needed to know. She had known for 3 years. She had made her decision about it a long time ago. "You're not afraid of me," he said. "Should I be?" "Most people are. Most people don't see your margins," she said. "They see the surface. The surface is scary." She picked up her wine glass. "The margins are just math." He looked at her for a long time. The candlelight, the warmth of the restaurant, the sound of Bettina laughing at something in the kitchen. Rosie Callum, with her hair down and the plum dress she'd apparently worn twice now, and the reading glasses in her bag because she'd brought them without thinking, the way you bring the things you actually need. "I should have seen you earlier," he said. "You weren't ready," she said simply. Not unkind. Just true. He thought about that. "Are you still seeing Arthur Finch?" She looked at him over her wine glass, with an expression that walked the line between amused and withering. "I texted him this afternoon." "What did you say?" "I said I needed to step back." A pause. "He said he hoped I'd be happy. He seems like a decent person. He's a very decent person." She set the glass down. "This is the part where a woman like me is supposed to feel guilty for choosing the wrong option. What do you actually feel?" She was quiet for a moment, looking at the table. Then she looked up, and there was no mask. Not the professional one. Not any of them. Just her. "Like I'm tired of taking up less space than I'm allowed." He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. His hand was much larger than hers, and he held it loosely, not possessively, an offering. She looked at their hands, then at him. "Complicated," she said. "Yes," he said. "Correct," she said, and she turned her hand over and held his back.